What's up, beautiful people? Today we're going to be checking out Lavrov's speech at a press conference in New Delhi, India, following the G20 summit. So if you don't know who Lavrov is, he's the foreign minister of Russia, and mostly he represents Putin. That being said, let's get to it.
Dear colleagues, as I understand, you have all already read the declaration of the G20 summit. Therefore, I will not say a long opening statement. I will say briefly that the G20 summit is an unconditional success. First of all, this is the success of the Indian chairmanship, as well as all of us. I would say that the G20 is undergoing internal reform. First of all, this was manifested in the significant activation of the G20 members from the Global South, who, with the leading role of India, very clearly and persistently sought to take into account their interests in the agreements discussed at the G20. As a result, they were included in the declaration. The whole pathos of these agreements, which relate directly to the terms of reference of the G20, is that the Global South wants to strengthen its role in the mechanisms of global governance so that it adequately reflects its real weight in world affairs, including in the economic sphere. As you know, where BRICS has already surpassed the G7 countries in terms of gross national product, and the declaration formulated the tasks of reform and the International Monetary Fund, where for a long time now, if quotas and votes are fairly divided, then the Americans will not have a blocking ticket, which they maintain artificially, of course. The summit will give a very serious and positive impetus to efforts to reform the International Monetary Fund and the World Trade Organization. This is also explicitly stated there, efforts that, I will emphasize this again, are artificially restrained by the Americans and their allies, and, in the same vein, there is an emphasis on the need for the West to fulfill its obligations and long-term promises, which are also not being fulfilled, including the transfer of technology. The clear message is that developing countries will no longer accept being presented with the false choice of either fighting poverty or investing in the fight against climate change. This is a false alternative, and, of course, the objectives of economic and social development come to the fore in this regard. The declaration also records the need to fulfill long-standing promises about the transfer of technology to the countries of the Global South.
Transfer of technologies. Russia said they're open to do that, even the advancement in AI. And Putin particularly said that by himself in the 15th BRICS summit.
Not just to export raw materials from them and then receive added value and corresponding profits. It also says that the West has long signed up to allocate $100 billion annually to prepare the economies of countries to counter the negative consequences of climate change. None of this was done, so the declaration reminds us of what needs to be done in accordance with long-standing promises, and to do this, in order to ensure a balance of interests in the global economy. This is not a close path, but, nevertheless, the current summit has become, to a certain extent, a turning point in terms of a clear focus on precisely such tasks. I would also especially note the following. I have already mentioned the active role of the Indian presidency, which truly consolidated, probably for the first time in the entire existence of the G20 group, consolidated the G20 participants from the Global South. Our BRICS partners, with the exception of India, Brazil and the Republic of South Africa, were especially active and, largely thanks to such a consolidated position of the Global South in defense of its legitimate interests, It was possible to prevent the success of the West's attempt to again Ukrainize the entire agenda, to the detriment of discussing the urgent problems of developing countries, and it is significant that the Ukrainian paragraph is included in the declaration, and it is the subject of consensus, but it is not about Ukraine. Yes, the Ukrainian crisis is mentioned there, but exclusively in the context of the need to resolve all conflicts that exist in the world. In the context of resolving these conflicts in accordance with all the purposes and principles of the UN Charter in their entirety and interconnection. This is very important because the West, as you know, as soon as it comes to Ukraine, it cannot enter into intellectual discussions, but it only demands an end to Russian aggression and the restoration of the territorial integrity of Ukraine. And territorial integrity in the UN Charter is written down along with, and, by the way, chronologically after the principle of equality and self-determination of peoples. And when we explained to our colleagues, and on the sidelines, we talked a lot about this. When the coup d'etat took place in Kiev in February 2014, and when the putschists who came to power first of all proclaimed the task of abolishing the status of the Russian language in Ukraine, which served as the so-called trigger, then the residents of Crimea and the residents of Donbas were indignant, saying that they were not going to live in such a country, and thus, with such an attitude towards its citizens, the Kiev regime undermined its own territorial integrity. Because the declaration of the UN General Assembly on the principles of international law states that it is necessary to respect the territorial integrity of those states whose governments respect the principle of self-determination of peoples and which represent the entire population living in the relevant territory. The fact that the authors and perpetrators of the putsch in Kiev in February 2014 cannot in any way claim to represent the interests of the residents of Crimea and residents of eastern Ukraine. In my opinion, there is nothing to prove here, so the Kiev regime destroyed the territorial integrity of its country on its own, and, in full accordance with the UN Charter and in accordance with international law, the principle of self-determination of peoples came into force. We have once again made this very clear. And the correct understanding of what is happening among the developing members of the G20 is obvious. Well, I'm sure that some of our Western colleagues understand everything perfectly well, but you yourself understand that they are betting on the strategic defeat of the Russian Federation. But, as I already said, this paragraph as a whole is about geopolitical realities and in addition to the need to resolve all conflicts in the world on the basis of all the principles of the UN Charter in their interrelation in their entirety, it contains very important agreements on how to move forward in the field of food security. It fully reflects our position, which President Putin has stated many times, that if everyone is interested, then it is necessary to resume the Black Sea Initiative in its entirety in both components of the package of the UN Secretary General. These are both Russian fertilizers and grains, and Ukrainian grains. By the way, in this regard, I will note another paragraph in this geopolitical section, where the West was forced to agree to a serious adjustment of its position. I mean the paragraph that calls for a stop to attacks and destruction of critical infrastructure, energy infrastructure related to agriculture. It is not directly mentioned there, but everyone understands that this includes terrorist attacks on the Nord Stream gas pipelines, terrorist attacks on the Telaati-Odessa ammonia pipeline. These are attacks on the Kakhovka hydroelectric power station. These are constant launches of drones on the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. So, I believe that this is a balanced and, most importantly, it reflects the reality of the paragraph that we supported. In total, the declaration contains more than 80 paragraphs. I am sure that you have already become familiar with it, or you will become acquainted with it soon. But, of course, the success of the summit created additional opportunities to continue the work to ensure fairness in the global economy and in global financial circles. And it is necessary for Western countries, after the summit, to think again about how capable they are and how correct it is from the point of view of their own interests to continue their line of dominance. The West will not be able to remain a hegemon, given that, objectively, new centers of world development have long appeared and are rapidly gaining strength. New centers of economic growth, financial power, and, of course, with this comes political influence. So, I think that this very healthy solution was found in the declaration regarding the need to achieve a fair and equitable balance of interests. I will repeat once again that this is not a close goal, but movement in this direction has already begun. In turn, we will continue to strengthen these positive trends, including during next year's Brazilian presidency of the G20 and during the South African presidency in 2025. By the way, Prime Minister Modi, closing today's last meeting, said that he will convene another G20 summit online via video conferencing before the end of this year. Most likely it will be at the end of November. So, this will be an opportunity to once again see how the agreements that were approved today, how they are beginning to be implemented.
Right, that's good. That's a good idea.
And more effectively pass the baton to our Brazilian colleagues.
Okay, yeah, that was a very long one. He stated a bunch of things from the exploitation and partnership with the global south, asking that instead of exploitation, we should work together and help build the resources. So he stated a bunch of things. Stated some facts about Ukraine and Russia conflicts. That's how I like to put it. And whether you think that was true, whether you think that was false, totally up to you. But feel free to do your own research on that information. And he spoke about the Western hegemony and dominance and said the West might want to rethink their dominance. Yeah, and they've been saying this, they've held their position for a very long time. You can see cases of the de-dollarization and a lot more. They're just trying to make sure, kind of like puts people in check, trying to show you that you're not better than all of us. Check yourself, otherwise we'll check you. So that's part of what he was saying that. Anyways, let me know if there's any point that caught your attention and you want us to discuss further. Feel free to talk to us in the comment section. That being said, is the end of this one. Smash the like button, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video. Peace. I made this bed on my own.